My older brother Ray has always been the center of every room he walked into. He wasn't just admired, he was trusted, respected, even a little envied. Growing up, he was the kind of older sibling everyone wished for. Protective, charismatic, the guy who'd shield me from bullies and teach me how to lace a tie before my first date. We were close. Maybe not the kind of close that shares secrets in the dark, but close enough that silence between us never felt heavy. Lately, though, something had shifted. Ray had started pulling away, not in big dramatic ways, but in the small, quiet gestures that accumulate over time. He no longer sat beside me on the couch during late-night movies. He stopped teasing me about my terrible taste in music, and when I'd ask how his day went, he'd offer vague answers, carefully chosen words that said very little. At first, I chalked it up to stress. He was nearing 30, juggling a demanding job, family expectations, and the weight of being the dependable one. But then came the lies. They weren't obvious at first. A text he claimed was from work, even though I'd seen the name flash on his screen, Liam. Nights when he said he was working late, yet returned with flushed cheeks and a half-finished coffee that smelled like cinnamon, not his usual black brew. I noticed, but I said nothing. We lived together still, in the quiet house we'd inherited after our parents moved abroad. There was comfort in that space, in the familiar creak of the stairs, in the way the walls held the echoes of laughter. And arguments long settled, but it had started to feel less like home, and more like a hallway of locked doors, Ray's being the one most firmly shut. I wanted to believe he was just going through something he didn't know how to talk about. I kept telling myself he'll come around. But doubt has a way of creeping in when trust begins to fray. And in that silence, I began replaying every moment, every small glance, every unfinished sentence between us. It wasn't the secrets that hurt. It was the fact that, somewhere along the way, Ray had decided I couldn't be trusted with them. Me, the brother who'd shared every awkward moment, every triumph, every heartbreak with him. Still, I stayed quiet. Until the night, everything changed. The night I came home early, walked up the stairs with the weight of unasked questions, and stood outside Ray's door, just for a moment. That's when I heard it. Soft laughter, low voices, intimate in a way I hadn't heard from him before. My heart pounded, not from suspicion, but from something deeper. A sense that I was about to step into a truth I wasn't ready for. I turned the knob, not knowing that what waited on the other side would rewrite everything I thought I knew. The door creaked open slower than I intended, as if my hesitation had seeped into the hinges. I hadn't meant to intrude, I truly hadn't. My hand had moved before my thoughts could catch up, pushed by something primal. Curiosity, concern, fear. I couldn't say. But once it opened, the world on the other side wasn't the one I recognized. Ray was there, sitting on the edge of his bed, close, too close, to another man. He was tall, lean, with dark curls falling over his forehead and an ease about him that suggested he belonged there. Their knees touched, their hands resting dangerously, close. There was a look exchanged between them, soft, unguarded, almost sacred. Then Ray smiled. It was the kind of smile I hadn't seen from him in years, the kind that said, "This is real." Time didn't slow down. It snapped. Broke into jagged pieces I couldn't gather quickly enough. The man turned his head first, noticing me in the doorway. His eyes widened, but it was Ray who moved, springing up as if burned, his entire body stiffening into something unfamiliar. "Wait," he said, stepping forward, voice sharp and too late. I didn't wait. I backed out, heart hammering, vision blurring at the edges. I didn't remember turning or closing the door behind me, only the sudden heaviness in my chest. I stumbled down the hallway, each step louder than the last, echoing off the walls, like accusations. Ray didn't follow. Maybe he didn't know how. Maybe he was still frozen in that room, trying to figure out how years of concealment could unravel in seconds. In the kitchen, I gripped the counter with both hands, trying to breathe. The air felt thin, like the truth had stolen the oxygen. I wasn't angry, not in the way people expect. I wasn't disgusted either. But I was betrayed. Not because Ray had kissed a man, but because he'd lived a whole truth in silence, while I'd believed we shared everything. The same man who'd coached me through my first breakup had never trusted me with his own heart. That realization cut deeper than anything else. My mind spiraled. How long had this been going on? Was Liam just a fling or something more? Had I ever really known Ray at all? Questions layered on top of each other, thick and suffocating. I stared at the closed door down the hall, its shadow stretching across the floor like a boundary I wasn't sure I could cross again. Ray had always been my anchor, steady, reliable. And now, standing there alone in the quiet aftermath, I realized something terrifying. He was still all those things, but he was also someone I didn't fully know. And I wasn't sure which part of that truth hurt more. The knock came just after midnight. Soft, hesitant, barely audible. I lay still, staring at the ceiling, as if silence could erase what I'd seen hours earlier. Another knock followed, firmer this time. Then the door creaked open and Ray stepped. Inside, he looked different, not in appearance, but in posture. Shoulders slumped, eyes raw. Vulnerable in a way I'd never seen him. "I didn't mean for you to find out like that," he said quietly, as if louder words might shatter the fragile space between us. I sat up, unsure of how to respond. The room felt colder than usual, as if truth had left a window open somewhere. He moved slowly, sitting at the edge of my bed like he had when we were kids, and I'd had nightmares. Except this time, the nightmare was his. "I've always known," he began, fingers laced tightly in his lap, "since I was a teenager. But I kept telling myself it was just a phase, that I could bury it. Be who everyone thought I was." "And Liam?" I asked, the name barely making it past my throat. His lips pressed into a thin line. "He's different. I didn't plan for him to matter. But he does. He made me feel like I didn't have to pretend anymore." The confession landed with weight. I searched his face for anger, for shame, for some crack that would justify the distance he'd built between us, but all I saw was fear, not of who he was, but of how I might see him now. "You should have told me," I said, voice trembling. "Not because you owed me, but because I thought we told each other everything." "I was scared," he admitted. "Not of you, of losing you, of being something you wouldn't understand. But you're my brother," I said. "You've always been my brother. That hasn't changed." A silence stretched between us, not heavy this time, but searching. He nodded slowly, swallowing hard, and for the first time in years, he looked small, like the boy who used to cling to me after Dad yelled too loud, or when Mom was late picking us up from school. "I didn't mean to betray your trust," he whispered, "but I've been betraying myself for a long time." That line stayed with me. There was hurt in his voice, but also a quiet kind of relief, like finally saying it aloud was a door unlocking from the inside. I reached over and placed a hand on his shoulder. He flinched, just slightly, before relaxing under my touch. "We figure it out," I said. "Together." Ray didn't respond right away. He just nodded, eyes glassy, and exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for years. In that moment, the betrayal didn't vanish, but it softened. And in its place, something fragile and new began to grow. Weeks passed, and the silence that once settled like dust between Ray and me began to lift. Slowly, cautiously, we found our rhythm again. It wasn't effortless. Too much had been unspoken, for too long, but the effort itself meant something. We were no longer dancing around the truth. It had been dragged into the light, and though it was awkward and raw, It was real. Ray didn't talk about Liam often, but I noticed changes. He smiled more. The heaviness he used to carry in his shoulders had lessened, like he no longer needed to brace against himself. One Sunday morning, I caught a glimpse of them in the park, Ray laughing, head tilted back, Liam touching his arm gently, like it was second nature. They didn't see me and I didn't interrupt. Instead, I watched from a distance, strangely comforted by the ease between them. Later that night, he mentioned Liam over dinner, casually, almost nervously. I listened, asked questions. Not about their relationship, but about Liam's photography. His obsession with old vinyl records, the dog he'd rescued last year. It wasn't about knowing everything at once. It was about showing Ray that I wanted to know, that I wasn't afraid of who he was becoming. We weren't the same brothers we'd been before. Something had shifted, deepened. There was still pain beneath the surface, little cracks that hadn't fully healed. But there was also trust, slowly being rebuilt with every honest word, every shared silence. One evening, as we sat on the balcony watching the sun dip behind the buildings, Ray finally spoke what we'd both been dancing around. "Do you ever think you really know someone?" he asked. I thought for a moment, then shook my head. No. I think we choose to know the parts they show us. But when they let us see more, that's when it matters. He nodded, staring out into the fading sky. "Thanks for not walking away." "I almost did," I admitted. But then I realized this wasn't about me. It was about you finally letting yourself breathe. A quiet fell between us again, this time filled with understanding rather than avoidance, the kind of quiet that didn't need words. Ray turned to me. "You think they'll ever accept me? Mom and Dad?" "I don't know," I said honestly. "But I do, and maybe that's a start." He smiled, the corner of his mouth lifting just enough to show it mattered. In the end, love didn't arrive with declarations or dramatic gestures. It came in the form of late-night talks, cautious laughter, and the courage to stop hiding. Ray hadn't just come out to the world. He'd come back to me. And in doing so, he gave me a version of him I'd never known. Braver, more whole, and finally, truly free.